Thank you, David, and good evening, everyone. We realize that you could be anywhere in the world tonight, and with technology, I literally mean anywhere in the world. But you chose to be here with us. So thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to the information. I'm going to thank you ahead of time that our amazing consultant has been hard at work compiling with the help of a major team. Some are Rec and Park staff, some are just experts from around the country, and some are everyday Oregon Ridge Park users. But before we go any further, I would like to introduce our amazing team here in the county with Recreation and Parks that we have working on this long-standing, long overdue endeavor. With that being said, I'll turn it over to our team members.
Yes, I will start. Good evening. I'm Bob Smith. I'm the Deputy Director for Recreation and Facilities Operations.
You can't unmute.
Yes, you can. We can
hear
you.
There we go. Good. All right. Hi, I'm the Deputy Director of Administration.
And your name is Courtney Weinstock, right?
Thank you, Roz. I'm so sorry, everybody. Running in from swim team, but yes, Courtney Weinstock, Deputy of Administration.
I am Drew Emmer. I'm Chief of Capital Planning and Development for Baltimore County Rec and Parks.
Good evening, Benjamin Porter, Chief of Nature, Environment, Ag, and Programs.
I'll go next. David Odell, Landscape Architect, Capital Division of Recreation and Parks.
Hi, my name is Molly Pickle. I'm a planner with Rec and Parks.
Annie?
Hi, I'm Annie Sanchez. I'm the Community Supervisor 2 for Oregon Ridge Park and Lodge.
Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica Janetta. I'm the Naturalist 2 at the Oregon Ridge Nature Center.
All righty, I think that's our team. I don't think I've missed anyone.
Dan.
Oh, Dan. Sorry, Dan. Dan, can you unmute? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Dan Carpenter, Chief of Administration. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Dan. Also, in the audience, I see we have one of our board members, Eric Vanderbeek, and Greg Heitner. I see Greg Heitner, the chair of our board. I see him in the audience as well. With that being said, I will turn it over to Elizabeth with Lardner Klein.
Thanks. We're really excited to be here tonight, and I'm going to run through an enormous number of slides, and I hope you'll stay with me. This will all be posted on the web as the recording and then documents to follow. And if possible, I think we'll get through it faster if you can hold your questions, and then we certainly want to hear questions and ideas at the end of this presentation. First of all, thanks. We're really excited about this project. We appreciate your interest in your attending this evening's presentation, or if you're looking at it on the website later. This is the second public meeting of the master planning process. Tonight, we will share our initial research and findings and welcome corrections, new insights, or other sources of data that you share. So this is really the foundation. Now's the time to say you missed this, or you didn't get this quite correct, or this is terrific. Keep following that information. Get my cursor up here to. We are a team. We are a big team, as was alluded to in our introduction. I'm the team leader and am supported by a group of really talented professionals in their firms. Our team is Lardner Klein. We're responsible for master planning and landscape architecture along with Siri, LLC, and Kara and I are both on the call this evening. Other team members include CHMGS, who's been working with staff, and thank you, Jessica and Annie, for all that you've pulled together to get data to better understand current use patterns in the park. Margaret's looking at recreation trends and needs locally, regionally, and nationally as benchmarks, and then reviewing the demographics of the surrounding area in increments of drive distances to the park, which we'll show you towards the end of this evening's presentation. Environmental systems analysis has been in the field this spring. I think Leslie Wood is going to join us on the call. They've walked the park with some of you and are responsible for many of the photographs in this presentation, including the amazing drone pictures that Mark took. MTFA is providing architectural support and has developed measure drawings of several of these existing park buildings and performed a high-level visual assessment of building conditions. It's not a structural review, but a visual review. RK&K Engineers is focused on addressing infrastructure capacity questions. Our shorthand internally on our project team is parking and potties is a big issue in this park. 2 additional firms are expanding the project's public engagement. Chesapeake Conservancy is hosting an event on July 17th at the Nature Center Pavilion in celebration of Latino Conservation Week. That's a national event with a local activity in this park. Also through Chesapeake Conservancy, the park will, and I think now has, a Spanish-speaking ranger for the summer who will be out and about in the park. Asueto Consulting will help host a park activity on October 1st when we come back at the same time with you for our next public meeting. Oregon Ridge is just a magnificent place. It's over 1,100 acres in size. And this stunning photograph that Mark took speaks to the diversity and richness of the forest, the park's forest canopy. If you look at the different greens and you're knowledgeable about trees, you can tell me which forest is which by those colors. A refresher of what a master plan and is not. This is a slide from our first meeting, but I just want to bring it up because not everybody is familiar with this process. A master plan is not a set of construction drawings. So when this plan is approved, adopted, or whatever process it goes through, there will not be activities immediately happening in the park as a result. This is more of a high-level look at identifying needed park improvements and identifying a magnitude of costs so you can start orchestrating what choreography of those improvements should take place. The time frame for those improvements is the next 20 years. So we're looking at 2042 for this to be finished in terms of its recommendations. Long arc over the next 20 years. So what you need to be thinking about in the context of a master planning process is when you come back to Oregon Ridge Park in 2042, what should your experience entail? To be successful, we need to make sure that the dreams and desires you have for this park are incorporated in this plan. And again, thanks for attending and indicating your interest in sharing your passion for this park. An overview of our schedule. Again, it's a slide from our March presentation, slightly updated. We are still in the explore phase. It takes a long time to wrap our hands around the entire park and all of the pieces that make up the park. We've been working diligently since starting in January. This summer, we're going to move to the Imagine stage, and we'll wrap up the final plan in the late fall 2022 or early winter in 2023 with the recommended plan. And I think that will be coming back to you in early January for another public meeting. An updated schedule of milestones. And I have an annotation request. Can you all see that? I don't know where that's coming from. Or is that just me that can see that from Marta?
It's just you, Elizabeth. I think someone sent it by accident.
I'm just going to decline it because it's right in the middle of the screen. Okay. The updated schedule, again, this was presented in March and we've tweaked it because master planning is a journey and things shift as you go through the process. We had our meeting on March 15th. We're now on June 14th, where we're coming back to share our initial inventory findings. These will all, it's a massive amount of information, so you're getting a rapid tour through our findings, our draft documents with the maps, reports, footnotes, and all of the documentation we'll post on the Oregon Ridge Park website probably in July as draft documents for you to look at. The bilingual rangers in the park, Latino conservation event is July 17th. We're going to be out in the park doing some pop-ups. And what is a pop-up? It's a jargony term that just says, we want to get in the park. We want to intercept the casual park user, the folks that are hard to find through interviews or focus groups or organized teams or organized nonprofits. So we'll probably pop up a little tent and walk around and ask people what they think about the park, what their dreams are for the park. And then we'll do a repeat in the fall when we started to gel some concept alternatives so we can begin to get an initial response to some of the program ideas we're speaking about. And then we'll come back and share that with you on October 1st. So put that October 1st date on your calendar. Every time there. Oregon Ridge is known for 3 clusters of organized activities as seen on this diagram: the lodge, the nature center, and the softball fields at Cuba Road. And then the majority of the 1,100 plus acres are accessed by an extensive trail network. They're covered by a number of different vegetative communities, from recently logged forest to extensive oak forested lands, with 30 plus acres of meadow, a vast open lawn area, extensive utility corridors slicing through the park, and rich water resources, including a Class 3 trout stream in the southern side of the park and 3 ponds. The former Ivy Hill Forest Preserve was down in the southern portion of the park. I've got to move people's photos down in this area. And then the ski lodge is what we call the lodge today. The mix of actively developed park area and extensive natural areas will shape the recommendations for these park concept plans that we'll come back with. What are the park's origins? The relatively recent origins are as a historic mining community. The Nature Center, at least philosophically, if not physically, in the same sense as the Ivy Hill Forest, and that's in that brochure on the lower left from the early 60s. And the ski lodge, which this amazing brochure on the right is hanging up in the lodge today. While times in the park have changed, Oregon Ridge Park continues to provide a respite and recreational resource for Baltimore County residents. And I found this digging on internet research, the brochure from the 60s stating, "For you who wish to leave behind the tensions of the busy world for a few hours, Ivy Hill Forest provides quite a haven. For active business executive, the professional man, the housewife who wants a complete change of scene, for anyone who wants a breath of truly fresh air and tranquility, Ivy Hill Forest is an inviting wilderness." So some things have changed and some things haven't. It's still a really incredible place for people to get lost within. But we have professional women today. The master plan, it also gives us a chance to take a fresh look at how we display information and how we engage the public, both during the process of the plan and also when they navigate it and use the park. What's the best way to display the assets of the park? The map on the right, the Oregon Ridge Park Trail System map, actually flips north. Traditionally, if you think of your road map, north is up. This has north down, but it almost counterintuitively makes sense that you enter the park from the bottom and move up. The map on the left is the more traditional way to portray the park. Here's the lake, and then here's the lake over here, so they're flipped. So one of the things we'll be thinking about and would be interested in your reaction is, what's the best way to help people navigate this park? It's a little confusing for people that aren't used to it, so help us think that through as well. We definitely, as part of our work, will look at better signage for the entries, and we also have a component within our scope to look at overall wayfinding. So thinking about moving through the space and what would be helpful for us. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and give you a high-level summary of what we've learned to date. We're still actively doing our research, and we probably will right up to the day we tie the final recommendations up and turn them over to the county. We've been in the field, we've been digging through old files, we've been speaking and listening to users and lovers of the park, but we're not complete. We're sharing what we found and synthesized to date. And then later, as I mentioned earlier, some of these documents will all be posted on the web so you can review them at your leisure and give us comments on the contents. This stage of it, the project takes a lot of time. We're pulling together many disparate threads, and that will form a solid base for our recommendations for park enhancements, protections, and improvements over the next 20 years. Our work is focused on 3 broad categories of investigation: site conditions, recreational use assessment, and public engagement. First, I'm going to run through an overview of our natural site conditions findings to date. As illustrated in this photo, the park has an array of vegetative community associations. This image displays 4 found along the utility corridor, and those are most related to soils, aspect, drainage, and slope, but you can begin to see the richness of the forest in this park just through this cut on the utility as it climbs up the hill. Our team drew from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources materials. This map is a compilation of 3 layers of their data. The park is a large hub in the green infrastructure plan. The entire park south of Schwann Road is classified as a Tier 4 in the Biodiversity Conservation Network. And a portion of Basement Run is the best of the best. You already know that, and you've shared that with us, and this just adds additional confirmation to that fact. We also then did a lot of field work. ESA was out on the site and started doing forest stand inventories and vegetative communities assessment, and mapped a more precise version of the FIDs, the intact and extensive hardwood forested lands that DNR had mapped, but being on the site in the field, they modified it. These lands provide habitat for forest interior dwelling birds to successfully breed, and there are swaths that are conducive to these FIDs, or these areas are shown on this map with a yellow hatch line. So if you can see in here, these are the ones that were field annotated with the offsets from things like utility corridor. The green is what came from the DNR's database. So see this as a series of nesting dolls. We're taking the state work and then further refining it with feet on the ground and documenting that. An important question which we get on a lot of our park work, and I don't think we'll get it at Oregon Ridge, but I think I want to just make it clear for any of you who may not be familiar with it. Why do we care about large swaths of forested land? DNR's bird list, highlighted on the left of the images over here, is highlighted with data that Leslie got from eBird. The yellow and the green highlights are birds that are found in the park, but the yellow highlights birds that may also breed in the park. And that's just a really important asset, and large forest stands are becoming more and more unusual. A couple of the forest interior dwelling birds observed in the park include the Louisiana water thrush in the upper left and the pileated woodpecker on the lower right. Also of value are the meadows and the old fields. You have a very robust bluebird house network, and the number of bluebird fledges is a testament to the value of that meadow land cover that you have. And then on the lower left is the vulture house, as I understand. ESA in their field work also identified and is in the process of continuing to refine that information, their vegetation and natural communities found throughout the park. This diagram that they've created on the right is a very general grouping and overview of what was documented. The light green pattern, which I found striking, is the area that was the logged over tulip poplar forest. The dark green at the bottom of the image is the mixed oak forest. The meadow is up by Schwann Road in here. And then this is the area of the gypsy moth infestation that if you're up on the trail, you can read the interpretive sign about that history. Images of these same plant communities taken by ESA during their field work. Note the 3 different tulip poplar communities on the lower right, and a shout out thanks to Charlie Davis for this image. And again, this will all be explained in much more detail in the final document for you to look at, but just give a sense of the scope of effort of what people are looking at in the field here. These are photos ESA took during their spring field work. The native azalea is a desired plant, the native honeysuckle, the microstegium down here, not so desired, the lesser celandine, not so desired. They're invasive and crowd out other plants and native species, but they are in the park, so it's important to know where they are so they can become part of the master plan on how do you treat these concerns. Similarly, ESA also looked at the site's hydrology, and this again is a map in progress. There are 2 main stems, Basement Run and Oregon Branch. There are groundwater seeps or springs at the head of most of the tributaries, which are indicated by these little circles. They provide cool 55-degree water, which really supports that trout and fish population. The seepage swamps are also dominated by skunk cabbage. And there's more detail again, and this will be explained in even more detail in the final report, but it tells you just as a sense of what people are looking at in the field. And then these are some of the photos that they took during their field work. This is an interesting photo with a rock roof over one of the groundwater springs along Baseman's Run. This is another image looking at the forest cover towards the lodge, and I'm going to switch to give a high-level summary of our built conditions built site conditions. Here's the lodge down here, the utility corridor, and then the nature center over in this area with Shawan Road and Cuba Fields in that area. Starting with the nature center, the team led by MTFA did a visual assessment of existing buildings. And I just want to stress, it's a visual, not like a structural or a deep building assessment, but a visual conditions assessment. MTFA's team looked at windows, doors, siding, roof, interior spaces, restrooms, and ADA accessibility. And then each of those elements was ranked in a metric of excellent, good, fair, or poor. And then from that was drawn a singular overall condition. So this is a technique that sort of gives us a broad condition review. It's by no means a document that is greatly detailed in terms of structural or recommendations for those kinds of changes. It's also a reminder that this ranking, where the nature center is coming out as fair or poor, is not the nature center programming. It's the nature center overall building facility. So these are all related to site building conditions, which is important in the master plan. So what do we need to do to address those as we come back with recommendations? The nature center was built in 1983. It's a cherished facility. It's a bit invisible from the entry. I have to say I'm a pretty savvy park user, and it took me a moment to find the entry to the nature center. So anything we could do to help a less savvy park user know how to navigate there would be helpful. And then the back, the hidden treasure in this building is the stunning view out the back window, which is in this image on the right. The overall condition, as I said, is fair to poor. High-level summary of needs we've started to put together, because again, the concept alternatives that we come back to you with in October will attempt to address these in different ways and ask for your take on how we're addressing these problems. Bottom line, this is such a successful facility. It needs more space. It needs more room for educational activities. It needs more room for storage. It needs better access for animal care. The building also needs AC for summer comfort, some building repair, and improvements to make the facility ADA compliant. MTFA has done measured drawings of this building, and the next step will be to take the results of this field work and begin to talk about alternatives. Should it be renovated? Should it stay in its same place? Should it be rebuilt somewhere else? If it's expanded, for what and what activities? Or should it become more of an outdoor space? And we as a master planning team don't have the answers. We're looking to all of you to help guide us in making those answers. We'll come back with suggestions and then look for your responses. A similar evaluation and set of measured drawings was generated for the lodge, built in 1964 as a ski lodge. It's got a multi-purpose room and 2 meeting rooms. And the overall condition, again, on a very gross view and visual assessment, is fair. The lodge has similar laundry list of needs. It has no AC, which limits its summer rental use. It could probably have a better space allocation inside. It really reflects the allocation for a ski lodge, and you could change how the reception works for visibility and greeting visitors, but also making it secure for handling transactions. There's some water issues, restrooms and reception desk are not ADA compliant, and that's normal in a park of this age because the ADA is a fairly new set of regulations. And so as you go in to upgrade a park, one of the natural things you do is bring the park into compliance as you make those changes. We looked at the concert shell, the open structure with a fabric roof. It's an important asset in this park. And as we interviewed folks, particularly the large event users, they were extraordinarily complimentary about the setting for this concert shell, the park, the proximity to the playground, and also reminded us that in fairness, we should not compare this to, say, Wolf Trap, but we should compare this to other county park performing arts facilities. And in that context of a regional or a county park where it's a multi-purpose park, this is a fantastic facility. Overall, it's in good condition. It does have needs. It's not, again, ADA compliant, and the plywood flooring does not age well, and it doesn't support much weight. It would be nice to be able to put the high school choirs on risers on the stage. The dinner theater is a whole nother subject. It was built in 1966. Its overall condition for the building is poor. There's severe deterioration of the concrete masonry in some places. Its interior is magnificent, but also very dated and not ADA compliant. So what happens here? That's something that we need to think about in our alternatives. And maybe we have different options that we can have a conversation about in October. The large playground at the lodge, the pluses, it's in the queue already for replacement or refreshment. So take the overall condition as with a grain of salt, being port of fair, because everybody knows it's about to be replaced. So it's safe, but it can become more attractive. We did a similar assessment, as I'm going to run through things like the playground, as we did for the buildings, the playgrounds, picnic pavilions, and restrooms. And we used the same visual metric as used for the buildings on that good, fair, poor, or excellent, good, fair, or poor metric. The good news, as I said, is this is in the queue to be replaced. I think one of the things the master plan needs to address is where is the best location for this? Should it stay where it is? Should it be relocated? Right now, it can't be used when there are large events happening, and it's also pretty close to parking lots and roads. So we just need to think through what's the right place for the playground. The playground at the Nature Center benefits from having natural shade with the tree canopy. And if you talk to people who take children to playgrounds in the summer in this region, shade is like the #1 desired request for the playground once you get past the equipment. And the overall condition of this playground is good. Again, we looked at picnic pavilions visually. Their overall condition is good. A couple of them are very recent additions to the park. Problems were identified, but they're primarily related to parking shortages and ADA compliance. So although this is on a pad, ultimately you would like a path that connects us to accessible parking. Similar review of informal picnic areas was completed, and again, their overall condition was assessed as good, and then ADA compliance issues were identified. Just things like having the picnic tabletop extend so a wheelchair could be at the end, and having an accessible path to at least 20% of your picnic areas. Restrooms, overall condition for the 3 freestanding restrooms is poor. They're the ones that are right up the hill from the lodge. There are also public restrooms inside the Nature Center and in the lodge, and those were evaluated as a part of the building assessment. And their ADA compliance and those issues would be incorporated in the more detailed building assessment there. Then again, back to potties and parking. So restrooms is definitely something we need to speak to in the master plan. There are temporary restrooms throughout the park. There's a temporary permanent restroom near the lodge. They're in overall good condition, but again, that's not a really great solution for permanent bathrooms in the park. And then there are 2 seasonal porta potties that get put, one at Cuba Road and one at the Nature Center. We looked at the athletic fields and exercise equipment in the park. There are 2 softball fields across Shawan, which are referred to as the Cuba Road fields, used for adult and softball and girls fast pitch softball. The fields are in good condition. the exercise equipment is in less good condition and is pretty tired. And one of the questions is this something that people would be interested in seeing replaced, or is this some recreation activity that has passed its time? Would be interested in hearing your response on that. We were also looking at infrastructure. This is the underpinnings of what makes the park work. You don't want to know about it, but you know when it doesn't work. Septic and sewer really govern what can be placed in the park, what can be expanded, what can be enhanced. Without adequate sewer and water, your park is really limited to who lives nearby. If the bathrooms are not open, it's unlikely somebody's going to bring their children from very far away if there are no bathrooms in the park. The current sewer and water system is provided through septic and wells, with most of those systems installed between the 1960s and the late 1980s. Public water and public sewer is not available and not an option. We've looked at this with county staff, like how can we upgrade the existing septic and replace the septic with new septic? How can we potentially add more capacity to the park? And we think there are some viable options to replace aging septic systems and add additional capacity. And similarly, water supply should not be an issue given the aquifer that you're sitting on. It just costs money to fix these things, but we think there are viable solutions to address these concerns without involving public sewer or water tap. A second governing infrastructure issue is traffic and circulation. RK&K also looked at the traffic patterns. The roads surrounding the park are two-lane rural roads without sidewalk or curb and gutter. The vehicular exit from the lodge is hard to see people coming from the north onto Beaver Dam Road. We've tried to understand how people get to the park. From what we've heard and what we've observed, most people arrive by car. The light rail sort of serves the park, but it's a long walk in August from the light rail with a toddler or a teenager from the light rail. RK&K looked at the current traffic patterns, the intersection capacities, and the potential impact on intersection traffic from additional activities. Should any of the current activities be proposed for expansion, like expanding the nature center, given its great success with its programming, or other activities added to the park? And it appears from their cursory look, at least on weekday traffic, it should not be an issue. There's additional weekend studies that probably should be done. But at first glance, there is some room for expansion, whether it's expanding existing uses or adding other uses on a traffic side. Parking is another infrastructure issue. The challenge in parks is you don't want to park the park. People are coming to the park because they're not going to a surface parking lot that covers the area. So you don't want to end up paving the park to accommodate all of the visitors to the point that you no longer have the park. But your current parking is really inadequate for your current levels of activities in the park. So one of the questions as we come back to the concept alternatives where we can structure choices that we all can discuss communally and civilly is, what's the best way to do that? Should parking be expanded? Should there be more paved parking? If so, in what extent and where should that parking be located? Should there be more overflow parking with better markings so the overflow gets used more often? We'll have to wrestle with this. Right now, you've got 300 permanent paved parking spaces at the lodge, 20 at Cuba Fields, and about 100 gravel or paved near the nature center. And if you add up the metric with just your lodge use and your picnic pavilion use and filled those each to their capacity, you don't have enough spaces. So we have to think about parking as much as we magically wish people could just jet in and not have a car. Trails are another piece of infrastructure in the park and are probably the most loved and recognized component of recreational activity in this park. They're being worn down to nubbins. This has been exacerbated during the pandemic. We've seen this in every park across the country where people felt comfortable being outside and started using outdoor spaces. And I think one of the challenges facing park operators is, how do you keep those people coming to your park and invest enough so that the facility supports that additional use. The master plan does not include a trail assessment in that we're not doing an inventory of all the trails that may not be officially on the map, but we will include recommendations for trail improvements, connectivity, and ADA accessibility. We have the initial layer of our information is the formal official trails in the park that are mapped on the county GIS system. So the red trail, the yellow trails, the blue, the one around the lake trail. That's our baseline. Those are the ones that are documented. Then we have a collection of proposals that have been made in the near past or currently. The 2021 proposal to reroute portions of the yellow trail, we can add to that document. There was a 2018 plan for some realignment and work around the lake, which we can gather. There are also other sources like all trails, and there are a lot of goat paths in the park, but I don't think are going to be able to get to that fine of grain to map all of those, but we will certainly address those issues. And how do you make recommendations for trail removal in some of those places to better protect high quality forest lands? Is there an option for multi-use trails in some areas of the park? Or is there an option for a paved multimodal trail, say around the park's perimeter? So these, again, are all things that we're going to be looking to you all for your input and your ideas. And we'll be working on alternatives to bring back to you in October. So let us know your thoughts on those subjects, please. In addition, so I'm going to switch gears and we're going to start talking about our high-level summary of recreational program assessment, and LOS is jargon for level of service standards, which in the recreation industry is what activities do you provide per population, and what are sort of national standards and regional standards for those activities per population. So we're doing a recreational program assessment level of service metric. How does this park compare in its offerings and attendance and benchmark with other similar sized regional parks? Regional parks are unique and different from neighborhood parks in what they offer to residents. So one of the things that our team and Margaret with CHM is looking at is how does Oregon Ridge and its activities benchmark against other regional large parks in the area? You can see from this slide, and thanks to enormous support from Jessica and Annie in particular, Margaret was able to pull together a compilation of current program and activity users for the lodge side of the park and the nature side of the park. Interestingly, when you add up, and these again have to be recorded, so this is not the casual user that's hiking a trail or coming to throw a frisbee in the lawn. We'll have to capture those in our pop-ups. But people that have registered for programs or on sports teams or have made a permit reservation show up in these numbers. And you have about equal use of both sides of the park, 79,000 to 66,000. Again, tracked attendees. So we need to find out how the park is used by untracked attendees. Because the weakness is really the informal park user, the families using the playgrounds, people walking and running the trails, and we want to know how those people access the park and their frequency. And again, the park pop-ups, trail counters can sometimes capture that, but they also capture animals that go by the trail counter. So pluses and minuses with that. We were tracking zip codes from permit holders. This was one of the tools in terms of the data that was available from the county and from the park to figure out where people are coming from who use this park. And if you look at the lodge side of the pavilion, the picnic pavilions at the lodge, those are governed by permits. And we were able to go in and look at zip codes. And you can see these little dots show how many permits for each of these geographic areas were for the picnic pavilions. And what we learned based on that data was most of the picnic functions, the person who reserved the permit, it may not be the attendees, but the person who put their zip code down when they got the permit, are from within a 15-minute drive to Oregon Ridge. The other interesting item on the picnic side was the rentals are split into profit versus nonprofit organizations. So our presumption, which may be wrong or it may be right, is that those are mostly corporate renters if they're profit, like a corporate picnic event, and about 70% of the picnic pavilions are identified as profit organizations renting those. It was almost the flip at the lodge side. About 90% of the renters, the person who put the permit in, identified themselves as a nonprofit. So our presumption, and again, correct us if we're wrong, but as we look at the data, we're thinking that means weddings, birthday parties, those kinds of uses for the lodge. So it's a different user, interestingly enough, that tends to be renting the pavilions versus renting the lodge. Doesn't make it better or worse, it's just good data to have. And also the renters are coming from a slightly greater distance to rent the lodge. They're coming from up to 30 minutes. And again, you can see that from these numbers that indicate the number of permits from where zip codes. We also looked at the nature center side, and our source for zip codes on that was the membership of the Nature Council membership. So we looked, where do those folks live? And you have a slightly wider draw. You have about a third of the members by zip code on the mailing address are coming from outside of that 15-minute drive time. So here's the park. The blue is a 15-minute drive time. And we chose drive because our gut sense is most people drive to the park and don't walk to the park. And then this is a 30-minute drive time in green. And then this is a 60-minute limit drive time to the park. We then use those same drive time circles. So this is the 0 to 15-minute that I just showed you with Oregon Ridge in the center, to try to start to understand the demographics of who lived within 15 minutes of the park. We looked at these three data rings of proximity to better understand that. As an example, if you look at the language breakout on the right of the screen, within that 15-minute drive time donut around the park, and this data is all drawn from Esri and then the US Census data, which is all explained in the footnotes. The majority of residents within this area are English-only speakers, and there's a greater concentration of Indo-European. And just because this takes me back to grade school on the titles, Esri defines Indo-European, French, Italian, Greek, Serbo-Croatian, Persian, Urdu, Romanian, that batch of languages, and Asian Pacific. And in Esri's definition of Asian Pacific for this data set includes, but is not limited to, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Turkish, and Thai, then Spanish speakers. However, when you go to the 15 to 30-minute drive donut, the majority of residents are still English-only speakers, but Spanish speakers are comparable to those of Indo-European speakers. And then within the 30 to 60-minute drive, the majority of residents' dominant language is English only, but the numbers of Spanish speakers expand beyond the Indo-European and Asian-Pacific speakers. So the reason to do this is to get a better understanding of who's living near the park, who is being missed in offerings in the park, and who do we want to try to reach out and find to make sure that people who live in Baltimore County who are near the park are having a say in the park's future. Our third category to report out on is how we were doing park user input. Our schedule includes multiple points of public outreach and opportunities to get your input. Many of you have shared your time and thoughts with us to date, and we continue to welcome your concerns, your ideas, your dreams, and your hopes for the park. Please continue to share those with us. You can email them to the email, or you can contact any of the folks in Baltimore County, and that all information will get rolled over to us. We've already received tremendous help from folks who really love the park and know the park far better than we will ever be able to know the park in our short journey of doing this master plan. And I just want to thank in particular a number of the folks we've spoken with over the course of the spring who've provided tremendous resources and documents and ideas for us to look at. There's a whole additional collection of folks individually who have emailed their concerns and dreams for the park. And I want to assure you, those are going into a file and the team is reading those. So please continue to keep your ideas coming to us, and we will keep asking for input. We did we've completed about 90% of our first batch of interviews. There'll be another batch later this summer. And we took the 40 or 50 pages of transcripts and memos related to that. And I did a very crude word cloud to try to figure out, just based on this random sample of all the folks we spoke to, many of the ones that were thanked on the prior page, and park staff, what words tended to pop up most often. And I think, of course, appropriately, park pops up because it's the name of the park, but it's also the topic of conversation. But also, if you look at the second tier, nature, center, trail are some of the words that were mentioned most often. And then you get in the next tier, lodge and Baltimore, pavilion, parking, county, field. It just gives us a sense of the repeated words help us think about what we should be paying most attention to. So why do all of this work? We've been working on it since January. It's now the middle of June. What are we going to do with all this information? And I think the challenge in any kind of park planning, particularly a park that's been around for a while and has had a lot of things grow organically over time, is trying to get all the various threads of information into one bucket and synthesize all of that information. So we've been putting together a utilities map from different layers of utilities for the park. The natural resource people have been out in the field pulling together a lot of data. There's actually pretty good documentation in this park for natural resources, which is unusual. So that's been a huge help. The building assessment, we have drawings from when the buildings were built, but not much after that. So what's been done to those buildings? All of that comes together under the singular heading of Oregon Ridge Park. And we've tried to patch it all together and perhaps for the first time pulled all of these components into one big package. And that's what we will be using as our base for our future recommendations. We'll come back with things related to site conditions. If you remember, that was where I was talking about both natural site conditions and building site conditions, whether it's a picnic pavilion or a nature center or a lodge building. Are there alternative locations for the large playground currently near the lodge? Should we reroute? And if we do reroute or remove existing trails from high quality natural areas of the park, this avoids a lot of the invasive species from coming in and also protects the woods from fragmentation. It's very controversial because the nicest place to be in the park is in the highest quality woodlands. So that's a challenge to educate people as to why that's important. Should the lodge be expanded with a meeting area in the place of the current dinner theater, or should the dinner theater be rebooted in another form? Should we renovate or relocate and expand the nature center in its current site or elsewhere in the park? None of us know the answers to these. This is not a hidden question right now. These are the things that, based on what we've heard, these are the kinds of issues that are popping up and the kinds of options that we'll come back to talk to you about as options. Similarly, on recreation program assessments and trends, the concept alternative examples may or may not include a response. There's currently some bike use in the lawn area on weekday evenings where kids are taught how to do basic skills in that big open lawn on the hill. Should that have some trail access, or does that open up the park to too much potential damage? We don't know the answer, but that is something that people have talked about. Should there be a paved trail? Is there enough demand for recreational activities like a walking trail or a biking trail that goes around the perimeter of the park and doesn't go into the interior of the park? Should certain recreation activities currently in the park be scaled back, either because they're not a good fit or there's a lack of demand? And again, we're going back to look at what's the assessments say. And again, could we create multi-use trails on the perimeter internally to the park? I think that's the meeting in October where we need to really think hard and be respectful of each other's opinions and try to think what's the best future 20-year plan for this park. And that's where we will lean on park users and community members, vetting the alternatives. We'll do another series of interviews probably with some folks to look at alternatives. We'll do casual conversations when we're in the park, say on a Sunday afternoon with our tent and our clipboard. We're going to do a survey and ask people to respond on the survey. And then we'll have the public meeting in October to get your responses. before we come back with a final recommendation. So just a reminder and to sum up, our next steps is the bilingual Spanish-speaking rangers in the park all summer. We have the event on the 17th of July in the afternoon over by the Nature Center. We'll be in the park, happy to listen and hear your concerns and your dreams for the park sometime in July or August, and we'll get that posted on the web when we determine what day it is, and then come back in September closer to as the alternative ideas are starting to gel to get your ideas on those. And then we'll share the concept alternatives in the park on October 1st in conjunction with some kind of event, and then come back in January with the final recommendations for the final plan. And with that, I want to thank you and remind you that there's a project webpage where this and the earlier presentation are housed. Eventually this summer, all of the documentation to the very high level, very surface level summary I just gave you will be, so you can drill down and see if we're misrepresenting the facts or if we've captured the information you sent to us correctly. And then you can always send emails to this address and they will get forwarded to both David and to our consultant team. And with that, I'd be happy to open it up to questions. And thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I overlooked Senator Heidelman, who's also on with us tonight. Senator, would you like to say a few words before we open it up?
Sure. Thank you. I was actually just typing something in the chat because I have a 7 o'clock meeting I have to go to, but I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. The park is now in the 11th district and I'm the senator from the 11th district. Obviously we have an election between now and then, but I hope to be reelected. I'm sorry about my dog barking in the background here. But I just, this is very exciting and I'm just thank you for the presentation and I look forward to working with the community, whatever the future plans may hold. So I'm really excited to have another amazing county park in the district. We have Lake Roland currently. I'm a big fan of it. I've worked really closely with the Nature Council there. So I look forward to working with all of you and getting to know you in the days and weeks ahead. And I'll put my contact info in the chat. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to say hi.
You're welcome. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your continuing support as always and for joining us tonight. I will turn it over to David.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Elizabeth. That was a fantastic presentation. At this point, we're going to turn it over to Molly. She's going to handle all of the questions. And again, if you can keep your comments to less than 2 minutes, that'd be great. And Molly will call your name and unmute you, and you can ask your question or give us your comment.
Great. So the first person who wrote in the chat was Jaron Shaw. So I'm going to unmute you and you're free to speak right now.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to point out that this is a pretty fantastic opportunity for Baltimore County to build and maintain some bike trails in the central part of the county, which would add something new and exciting to the park and still preserve the precious natural resources that exist there. As many of us are pretty acutely aware, the county doesn't maintain any natural surface bike trails in this part of Baltimore. So I'm a Baltimore native. I've enjoyed hiking trails at Oregon Ridge for decades. I went to summer camps there hosted by the Nature Center when I was a little kid. They were some of the most memorable experiences I had, and I'd really love to see that preserved. I think the large part of the park to the west of the existing trail system that doesn't have trails could and should have some new sustainably built trails that are open to bikes. Sustainably built multi-use trails are a pretty low impact way to enjoy the natural scenery and still open the possibility for some new user groups to enjoy everything amazing that is Oregon Ridge. Maintenance of those trails should embrace the stewardship of local mountain bike organizations like the Mid-Atlantic Off-Road Enthusiasts or more, which have a pretty proven track record of building and maintaining sustainable trail systems. Moore has also had years and years of experience rerouting trails, closing unsustainable trails, and can even help to secure funding for trail building projects. So it's my opinion that bike accessible trails would satisfy the county's desire for something new and appealing at the park while also providing and preserving the natural beauty and feeling that makes Oregon Ridge so special. Thanks.
Great, thank you for your comments. And the next person who wrote into the chat was Alex Waugh. You are now unmuted and you can speak.
Hi, I just want there was a talk about a map and the changes to the map, and I just had a comment for it. Was I had the idea of making two separate maps. For the paper versions, it could be like a double-side map, and have one side that focuses mainly on like the buildings, maybe like close up, and shows the roads and the Cuba fields and ag center area, and it's more helpful for people when they're driving in or trying to find parking or trying to find pavilions. And a second map that's oriented to be the true north, that's for the trails, that shows like the yellow trail and stuff like that. Because a lot of times we've got problems where we've got a version of the map where the area that's got the most buildings is a very small section of the map, and a lot of the area is just showing all the trails. So I feel it'd be really helpful if we could have maybe like for the signs and for the paper maps, having one that's dedicated to like all the little areas and pavilions, and showing also people the pavilions that are located in the lodge side and the nature center side. That was just my 2 cents on the map issue.
Thanks so much for your comments as we think through the mapping part of this. Now I do have a question I'm going to read out loud that was written into the chat from Manaz Mazari, who wrote, as a CEQ, I would like to know about your plan for an environmental impact assessment.
I can turn that over to the director or to David. That's not part of our scope and not a traditional part of any master planning project. There's not an actual construction project proposed yet.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think your answer would cover anything I would have said. So thank you.
Great, thanks. And then we have another question from Dr. Carol Newell, who wrote, please define what you mean by multimodal path around the park perimeter.
Sure, thanks. Sorry, that's another jargony word. Multimodal in this sense is a paved path for walkers, but wide enough for bikers, not bike racers, but bikers, like if you have a kid on a bike or someone going slowly. Skateboarder could use it in some parks. It's multiple users is the multimodal.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question from, Brian Bernstein was interested in speaking. You are now unmuted.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I represent Trout Unlimited, and we'll be providing over the next few days to a week a letter just stating some of our concerns. As you can imagine, as we all know, the park has tremendous resources, including both native brook trout and wild brown trout. One of the slides earlier referenced that the fish indicator level was, I think, rated as poor. I want to point out that in cold water resources, that's a typical ranking. The fact that we have native brook trout doesn't just happen. We should understand the role the forest plays and the soils play and the aquifers play in providing that. So we'll be providing some insight on that for sure. I just wanted to point that out. I also heard a name earlier tonight of Charlie Davis. Charlie, his wife Linda, are, I hope they don't mind me mentioning their names, are tremendous resources, among other people who have so much knowledge. I hope you are reaching out to people that have just wealth of knowledge. One of the names I don't think anybody has contacted is Mark Staley, who is the DNR Central Maryland Fisheries Biologist. Mark works closely with folks like Kevin Brittenham and others at Baltimore County. And we really need to have, your team really needs to have interviews or insight from him on those resources. My understanding from Mark is that he has not been contacted. So I would encourage you to do that to get a full picture of how important these resources are. We're very lucky to have them. My last comment is a little different than trout. It involves birds. if I understood, this is more of a question. If I understood earlier on the forest interior dwelling bird studies, you had used the state's parameters, 50 feet in, so forth and so on. But it sounded like your environmental consultant had done a slightly more involved analysis. And if I read the map correctly, has a smaller FID or forest interior dwelling boundary than what the state protocols, if you will, provide. What I would ask you to do, what I would ask is who is, if that's true, who is verifying that for you for the project? Who sort of is a source of approval of that to say, yeah, we would agree? I don't know if you have the answer to that tonight, but thank you for letting me ask those questions. And again, Trout Unlimited would definitely like to provide a letter outlining some of our hopes, dreams, and concerns. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And I am looking to see if Leslie was going to join on the call. She's leading the field work, and I don't know if she's on the call or not. I'm not seeing her name.
I'm here.
You're here.
I don't know
Okay.
if you can hear me.
You can. Can you answer the last question for me, please? You gave me a lot of slides. Leslie is with ESA and has been spending days in the park, including a day with Charlie. So
great. Awesome.
So the way we came, so the FIDS layer came from how the state just looked at land use, land cover data to show like a tree line, and that's sort of what the state's FID boundary is. And what we were trying to delineate was the actual interior forest. So understanding that you need to keep all of the forest in order to have interior forest, but highlighting like, let's keep the interior forest. So the way we came up with that was just in GIS. It was an offset, and I'm trying to remember now what the actual value is. I want to say it has to be 300 feet from 300 feet from the edge, I think maybe is the boundary, but that'll definitely be explained in the report, how we came up with that boundary of what exactly is an interior forest. But it is based on the definition that the state gives, that DNR gives.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Leslie, you may be able to speak. Mark is a phenomenal fisher man. So I don't know if you've all talked to anybody at DNR, but you could certainly relay that to Mark as well.
Yeah, Mark Staley, DNR, Central Maryland Fisheries Biologist Manager. Mark is the one we all coordinate with on all things trout, mostly in Central Maryland.
Okay.
Yeah, we can reach out to him.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question. Has this plan considered connecting to any other local green spaces through a green corridor? Asking about connectivity.
I can throw this back again to Leslie because there is a map that we did have that we pulled out, but it'll be in the final report, the DNR report with the green infrastructure with the, help me with the language, Leslie. There were corridors. I'm old enough, it was patches and corridors. Yeah, but it's not patches and corridors anymore.
Yeah, so DNR has done mapping you can view on their Merlin online maps, which we just pulled in, that shows hubs, and Oregon Ridge Park is a hub, and then corridors are typically like forested stream buffers that connect hubs. And then they also highlighted gaps where DNR is looking to conserve the land to expand a hub or expand a corridor. So we do have a map pulled together for that.
So, and the master plan can speak to what happens within the park, but it can certainly have passages about connectivity, and green connectivity is as important as people connectivity with trails. So I think we can do a broad statement that that's something that should be followed up on down the road. The plan itself is focused on the park itself.
And just to follow up on that, Elizabeth, we are in the department we're doing a trails plan with connectivity to Baltimore City, as well as Baltimore County. So depending on how big the scope will be for that project that we're getting ready to kick off, that may be included. Additionally, that's something that would be included more so in our countywide master plan, Recreation and Parks master plan, which is another piece that we're kicking off, but we want to make sure that this project is well on its way before we undertake another master planning process.
Thank you. And then the next person who requested to speak is Chris Coleman. Chris, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much, Molly. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Chris. I am dad to 2 kids here, and we're residents in Baltimore County. First, to our presenter today, I really enjoyed it. I have one small gripe. Slide 40, attendees in the park. It listed for sports attendees. Oddly, I found only 95 attendees in fiscal year 2019, and that number cannot be correct. So I would encourage you to look into that a little further. I know you've been in contact with a couple of people with an organization that I wanted to talk about, which is Baltimore Youth Cycling. BYC is a juniors cycling team that meets twice a week in the park, late summer through fall, which is the season for the sport of cyclocross. Cyclocross, in case the name is unclear, is not a motorized sport. It's a non-motorized bicycling sport, and is right now subject to kind of explosive growth, particularly among juniors. It's a fabulous way to get juniors into the sport of cycling and to bring about that lifelong love of cycling. What I want to ask specifically about, advocate for, is a dedicated cyclocross course in the park. This is not a racetrack. It tends, cyclocross course tends to use natural contours, natural features, natural surfaces, but has a path to follow, if you will. They tend to fold back on themselves, do not take up, given the relatively large area of Oregon Ridge Park, would take up a very small percentage. And currently Central Maryland does not have a single cyclocross course. They're featured in cities and small towns around the country and provide a good and safe venue for, as I say, particularly junior riders to get into the sport. I'll also mention, speaking about cyclocross, Baltimore, the metro area, is currently host to a UCI, which is the International Cycling Union, cyclocross race once a year called Charm City Cross. That is hosted in a Baltimore City park.
We have come up to about 2 minutes, so we want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. If you could wrap up some comments.
I'd be done if you hadn't interrupted. I was just going to say it would be amazing if that could move out to the county, have a better venue, a safer venue, a place with more space. Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll drill down in that table. The cycle programs that the kids are doing is on the lodge side, so that data should be on the lodge side. So I think the number you were referencing was from the nature center side, but we will certainly clarify that and dig down into that.
I may have misread. Thank you.
No. It could just be the mid-presentation of the data, so we'll make that more clear. So I appreciate the catch.
Yes, thank you for your comments. And the next, we had a question in the chat asking about the Latino Conservation Week. How will it be promoted in the county, and could a shuttle be provided as a one-time experiment from the Hunt Valley Light Rail to the park on that day?
So I will first speak to this, and then I don't know if someone else from the county wants to speak to it. The current thinking is to try to target folks who are not in the park currently for that event. It's going to be near the nature center in the pavilion. The concern is we want to make sure we're reaching people who have not been reached and not be overwhelming the park. So this is the week we're discussing all of that. So that light rail option is a good one to put on the table, and we'll put that into the conversation this week and next as we finalize it. That conversation. Anybody from the county want to add to that?
Yeah, that's something that we can consider. We currently don't provide transportation, but we have 3 new vans that we were able to receive with CARES funding to the department. So given what field trips and other things we have during that week, it's something we could certainly consider.
And this is a Sunday afternoon, if I'm looking at my calendar correctly. Latino Conservation Week is a national event which begins the 17th and runs through the 23rd. So the intent was to nest it within that. So thanks for the suggestion.
Great. And another question from the chat. What does Rec and Parks mean when they speak of the fields on Cuba Road? When Rec and Park speaks of field, do they mean the ball fields, such as the Cuba Road fields? When environmentalists speak of fields, we think of meadows, grasslands, and a diversity of plants. So what are we referring to the fields on Cuba Road as?
In this presentation, the term Cuba Road fields refers to the 2 softball diamonds as ball fields.
Thank you for the clarification. There's a chance we might need some more clarification on this question, but we have from Manaz Mizari Asadi, how about socioeconomic impact assessment, I think as part of the master planning process?
So there is a component in our scope, which is touched on a little bit in those driving distances with the ESRI data for demographic, but there is not a formal socioeconomic environmental assessment type process in a master plan, but we are looking at who is coming to the park, who is surrounding the park, who is being missed in the park in that sense. And again, that document will get posted with much more details and much more fluency than I'm doing justice to Margaret's work this summer.
Thank you. And another question in the chat, can you address the use of the pond at Oregon Ridge? Do you anticipate allowing swimming to begin at the Oregon Ridge beach area?
I don't know the answer to that question. People have mentioned that, and there are also a lot of challenges to providing that again. So I think the future of and also the language that we should use consistently in our plan, we'd love to get direction from all of you. We see it as Oregon Lake, Oregon Pond, Oregon Pool, and what we call it, or the Quarry Pond. But its future is up for discussion. What should it be? And I think that's a conversation we need to have, and we're the outsiders, you're the community, but we need to have with you.
And from an operational standpoint, I will share that there is currently a national lifeguard shortage. Ben Porter, who's on this call, can relate to it all too well. So operationally, that would prove to be a challenge for us right now. We currently have 2 beaches that we are responsible for, and we're having challenges hiring lifeguards for those 2, and that's Miami and Rocky Point. So just want to underscore some challenges there.
And I think it's an opportunity to look at that lake as an asset beyond its past history as a swimming lake. And what would be beneficial to the park? Does it become the backdrop for a performing arts facility? Do you do a boardwalk around the far perimeter so you have benches and you can sit sort of along the edge? There are a lot of opportunities that we should use our imaginations to revision that area of the park.
And the next question from the chat, the Maryland Department of Environment recommends bridges over the streams on the Yellow Trail. Is this being considered?
It's, at that level of detail, it's not being considered at this point, but we have heard that. And I think that can be part of the best practices for trail improvement in the park as part of the master plan. But again, the master plan will not drill down into a specific reconfiguration of trails within the park.
Right. And then how is the Oregon Grill being considered in the master plan? This is a historical building and land being rented from Baltimore County. It is also under new ownership.
So that is not included in the master plan. That property is rented through another department within the county. Property management holds that lease and has that lease. And so we do not look at it as part of the footprint of Oregon Ridge Park.
We do know about its utilities in our utility look.
Thank you. And then will the Oregon Ridge Master Plan include any overlap with the Maryland Agricultural Center plans or programs?
No, the Ag Center is not part of Oregon Ridge Park. It is separate.
Great, thanks for the clarification. And then Donna Newworth wrote, I would be interested in any data captured on birders specifically. I would not underestimate this group as a major user of the park. So do you have information on the number of birders who are using the park?
Turn back to Leslie. I know that Leslie's been in conversation and met with some of the birders. Can you speak to that, Leslie?
I do not have numbers of birders. I don't know the number of users. I could probably tell you, we do have a list that's been provided to us from eBird, and that gives the names of the people who actually added the data of birds that they observed in Oregon Ridge, and we can give you that number, but that's not going to give you anything close to the number of actual birders out there. So,
and that just raises a good important point to keep in mind, that birders, hikers, playground users are all what we almost call casual users of the park, that are hard to get numbers because they're not registered when they come in or out. So it's a soft data point, which we face in all of our park planning. So the pop-ups begin to address that, reaching out to folks, trying to get a sense of how robust is that activity in the park. It's very robust at Oregon Ridge, needless to say, but there's not good attendance data number count on that.
And then we had Cynthia Boyd wanted to speak. Cynthia, you are unmuted.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation. I did want to note there may be other people by phone who may wish to speak, and I don't know how they got in the queue. I did manage to join by computer. So I just wanted to speak to a couple of the uses that I think maybe not tracked as well. Some of those more casual users. I've been taking my family to Oregon Ridge for 20 years. My kids have participated in many informal scout programs there, both Boy and Girl Scouts, and also have contributed to a number of the service projects. And while there are phenomenal scout programs run by the Nature Center staff, which I deeply appreciate, I think there are many that are also organic from the community. And that may be more important, right? Like, you don't need a permit or to register to show up with 5 or 6 kids and go for a hike. The second piece I wanted to note is just the value of the unstructured nature of the park for children, including nature. I appreciate all of the attention and thought about things like being ADA compliance, and totally support that, but just wanted to make a plug for the smaller ways, like the wolf spider that my kids have found, the baby turtles that they've discovered, that are really sort of kind of, I think, off the radar screen. One of my sons volunteers every Sunday morning as a ridge runner, has done it for a year and plans to do it again. And I will just note that, like, Sunday mornings are a time where I think, like, it's really just like a phenomenal group of people coming out to experience nature and the unstructured places of it, people, running clubs coming there, people doing very informal things. And my final point is just that as we think about the green areas where there aren't trails, I just hope that we keep in mind the value of those spaces for the rest of the wildlife that we as humans get to enjoy in the rest of the park. And thank you for opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for your comments about the important uses of the park. We do have a question from Peter Lev. If you run multi-use trails through a FIDS area, is it still considered an unbroken forest interior? So questions about where this trails through FIDS areas.
I can speak to that. Yeah, technically it would. You need a break of at least 30 feet and up to 50 feet of canopy break for it to be no longer considered FID habitat. So having a 10-foot or 6-foot wide trail would not be a breakup of interior forest.
I think one of the big concerns as you break into that interior forest is the path that provides for things like stilt grass. So there are multiple reasons to be cautious about how you enter those large tracts of forest land. Leslie, you can build on that, but that's the invasive species issue is huge.
There's also tons of trails out there that aren't mapped, so.
Right.
Our next question is from Linda Davis, who asked, will the plan address the educational and research activities already happening in the park and the impacts that additional activities will have on those activities?
That's a good point, and thank you again for compiling that really robust list of activities that you sent to us. I think we can incorporate that list of uses in the plan, and I think we do need to speak to the potential impact. So yes, the answer is that will be part of the plan. And thanks to your providing us that information, because we would not have been able to easily get our hands on it otherwise. So I encourage you, other folks on the call and the presentation, if you have similar kinds of information you want us to be aware of. We have a limited amount of time and we're doing the best we can, but we are grateful for anything you share with us.
Thanks. Our next question from Debbie Bacharach is, are you looking at the electricity power as part of infrastructure assessment?
Is that a clarification that there's inadequate electrical, or is that asking to go to solar, or where are you going with that question? I'm not sure I understand.
Yes, there is inadequate lighting in the nature center. It has been addressed and it's better than it was, but it's still a big problem. So,
Okay.
and one of the things we heard about is the reason they can't have central air at the Oregon Ridge Nature Center is that there's not enough power. At least that's something somebody in the county told me at some point in the last 2 years, that there wasn't even enough power to do the air conditioning. So I would say that would need to be looked at.
Super, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll dig into that more.
Sorry, I started speaking. We have a question from Mary Glassman. Will additional naturalists be hired to fill the need for educational trips by schools? As a Green Center certified by the Maryland Association of Environmental and Outdoor Education, Oregon Ridge could offer more field trips with additional staffing.
Every year we look at our staffing components and determine where we need more staffing. So it is possible that we will submit that request, but there are many requests that are submitted throughout the county, so there are no guarantees on those requests. It depends on what type of funding year we're in and how budgets are in the county.
And I can also speak as part of our scope. One of CHM's jobs is to speak to staffing in terms of a 20-year plan. So they're an outside look, and could things be shifted, or is there a big need? They can't provide the staff, but they certainly are a pair of outside eyes doing a sort of broad overview of staffing. So they can raise that as an issue as well in their report.
Thank you. And I just realized I forgot to answer a question that came up earlier about whether we would be taking questions from the phones. And so we're going to keep going through these comments that came in through the chat, but at the very end, we will have a moment to unmute the phones to speak. Our question from Manaz Mazari Asadi was, will you send us the recording? And we do plan to post this recording online. It'll go to the county YouTube page and then also be posted to the master plan webpage on the Rec and Parks website. And then from Alex Waugh, will the plan address the historical areas of the park, such as the Iron Forge, historical buildings, and grave sites?
It will certainly acknowledge that those buildings are there. That is something we need to look at, I think, in more detail than we have to date. So yes, it will address those buildings.
Thank you. And then from Brian Bernstein, we have a question. Is it your goal to make this a regional park?
So it is a regional park in its name and also in its scale. A regional park sometimes is kind of a murky definition, but most often people define regional parks as having offerings that can't always be provided in neighborhood parks. Size alone is a big distinguishing point for a regional park. So it is, I guess I would need further understanding of the question about positioning it as a regional park.
Thank you. I think we only have one person on the phone right now. A number starting in 410, ending in 87. I'm going to unmute you now if you'd like to speak. All right, I don't think we have a comment or question coming in from the 410-87 number, but I do believe that is all of our phones calling in. So are there any last questions or comments?
Molly, I think we're good. I think that's the last of the questions or comments in the chat. And I imagine that we can turn this over for final comments from Director Johnson.
Thank you, David. Thank you,
Yep.
Molly. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the in-depth, excellent presentation. You just underscore time and time again why we made a great decision in choosing you and your firm. So thank you so much. I will also like to thank you all for attending tonight, for listening intently, for listening with an open mind, and for giving us your feedback. We have taken down all of your feedback. Thank you for spending little bit less than an hour and a half with us tonight. So hopefully you learned some things, you had your input considered and recorded, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next check-in point and the other focus groups where we will actually gather information and ideas as well. So Elizabeth and her team will continue to collect data and information, and this process will continue to move forward. Thank you to our amazing team in Recreation and Parks for spending your night with your favorite coworkers and your favorite residents. So have a great night, everyone.